And this recording is for the assignment that's labeled Mortgages for Unit 2, Consumer Math B. And so I'm going to be going over some examples that will help you through that particular assignment. So first of all, don't forget that they have in there. Make sure that you understand what each one means, because then they use those vocabulary words as you're doing some of those problems to work on, and so it makes it easier or faster when you understand those vocabulary words. So the first example I'm going to work on today is calculating simple interest. So they might give you a chart and ask you to look at the amount of the loan and ask you what percentage that would be if the loan rate was at a couple different rates. So let me just write those in there. So in this case, what you're going to do is when they give you some sort of percentage rate like this, we always use it in decimal form. So for 7%, we would change that to 0.07. So when we want to know how much money that percentage rate is, we would take, so for the $40,000 loan, we would times that by 0.07. And that would give us $2,800. For 50,000, same thing. Take 50,000 and times it by 0.07. So that would give us $3,500. And again, for the 60,000 times 0.07 gives us $4,200. Then we go back and do the same thing with the 9%, but we need to change that to a decimal. So 9% as a decimal is 0.09. So the first one, 40,000 times 0.09 would give us $3,600. 50,000 times 0.09 is $4,500. And 60,000 times 0.09 is $5,400. So notice the interest rate, look at the difference in price just by going up 2 percentage points. They start talking about mortgages, so they'll give you some information about the mortgage. So they might say that the amount of the mortgage is $225,000. The rate that you are paying that mortgage back is 7%. Then they tell you you're making payments. And the payments are 360 payments at $1,496.93. Now 360 payments. So we have to remember that mortgages are paid monthly. And so each month you're making that payment of $1,496.93. And so if we were to figure out how many years that is, we know that we're making payments, 12 payments each year. And if I made 360 total payments, if I divide that by 12 to figure out how many years, that means that this is a 30-year mortgage. Then the other thing that they give you is the total interest. And in this case, it's $313,894.80. So here's the information that they give you. Now, what does total interest mean? That's how much interest that was paid over that 30 years. So that's how much you paid just in interest with that interest rate. So then they ask you a couple questions about this information. So the first question is, how much was repaid total? So you had to pay the $225,000 for the house, but then you also paid interest for that loan. And so I take those two numbers. I'm going to add the $225,000 plus the $313,894.80, and that means that the total amount repaid is $538,894.80. So out of your pocket, that's how much you paid for that house. Another question that they ask is, what percent of the total is the total interest? So it's kind of an interesting question that they're asking you. So they want to know how much you paid versus the total interest paid. What percent is that? How much of the money that you repaid total, this $538,000, how much of that was the total interest as a percent? So in that case, we take the $313,894.80 and we divide that by the $538,894.80. And that will give us a decimal. So when we do this, we're always going to get a decimal, and then we have to change it to a percent. And so as a decimal, we get 0.58247, and it keeps going. So to change that to a percentage, we just move the decimal place 2 spaces to the right. So it's 58.2%. So the total interest that was paid out of the complete amount paid back was 58.2%. Then another question they could ask you is, what average amount per payment was for interest? So because our total interest was 58.2%, then what we want to do is take that percentage and multiply it by our monthly payments. And that will tell us how much of that $1,496.93 that we pay each month, on average, how much went to just interest. So we have to change that back to the decimals. So 0.582 times the $1,496.93, and that gives us $871.93. So that means that out of the $1,496.93 payment that we make each month, on average, $871.93 is going just to interest. So that's why it's important to have such a small interest rate. Okay. Another mortgage question. They might say the mortgage is $150,000, so that's how much money was borrowed from the bank for 30 years at $725 per month payments. What is the total interest paid? So to find the total interest, we're going to take our monthly payments, which is $725, and we're going to multiply that by 12, because we make that 12 times a year times 30 years. So 725 times 12 times 30, and that's going to give us $261,000. Now, that's how much we paid, but we want to know total interest. So we have to subtract the $150,000 that was the loan. And so the total interest is $111,000. Another mortgage question, they could say your mortgage is $100,000 for 30 years. The total interest is $90,000. What is the payment per month? So in this case, we need to know how much was paid total. So our first thing is we need to take the $100,000 and add the $90,000 paid in interest. So the total amount was $190,000 that was paid for this mortgage. Then we have to divide that monthly. So first of all, that was paid over 30 years. So if we take that and divide by 30, that will give us how much was paid each year. So then we get 15,833.3 repeating. So approximately $15,833 was paid each year. And then we have to divide that by 12 to know how much our monthly payments. So divided by 12, and so monthly payments are $527.78 a month. Okay, finding APR. So they always talk about APR, annual percentage rate. This is any fees plus the interest divided by the loan amount. So for example, if they say the fees were $968 and the interest was $6,342 and the loan amount was $90,180. What is the APR? So the APR says any fees plus the interest. So fees plus interest, so we need to take 968 and add that to our 6,342. So that's $7,310, and we need to divide that by the loan amount. So divided by 90,180. Again, this is going to give us a decimal, and we have to change that to a percent. So we get 0.08106, and it keeps going. Move that decimal place 2 spaces to the right, and so we end up with 8.1% as an annual percent rate. We can look at the APR as a formula as well. So the formula they give you is I equals 2YC over M times N plus 1. Now there's a lot of variables in here, so we need to know what each one means. So I equals interest. The Y is the number of payments in a year. So most of the time, that's 12. C is the total amount of interest. M is the amount financed. So how much money you got from the bank. And N is the number of total payments made, monthly payments. So the number of total months you made payments. Okay, so now that we know what those mean, let's look at an example. So, let's say you take out a mortgage for $80,000. The loan is 30 years at $600 a month. The total interest is $136,000 for 30 years. What is the APR? So we look at our formula again. I equals 2YC over M times N plus 1. So we have the 2 there. Our Y is the number of payments in a year, so 12, because we're making monthly payments, times the total amount of interest, which they told us was $136,000, divided by M. M is the amount financed, so that's the $80,000 for the mortgage. And then N plus 1, the total number of payments plus 1. So if we look at 30 years, we do 12 times 30, and that gives us 360. And so 360 plus 1 is 361. And then we need to compute that to see what we get. So 2 times 12 times 136,000 is 3,264,000. And then 80,000 times 361 is 2,888,000. Then we have to divide those numbers. Oh, I missed 1 0. So it's 28,880,000. Sorry about that. And so when we divide those, we get a decimal, 0.113019, and so on. But we have to change that to a percent because we want APR. It's a percentage. Move the decimal over 2 spaces, and so we get 11.3%. So that means that average for the year, each year, you were paying 11.3% interest. Now that you're done watching this recording, you need to call, text, or Skype message me so I can ask you a couple of questions about this recording, and then you can get credit for that assignment. Have a great day.